My beloved child. Something that was supposed to remain buried in yesterday has quietly found its way into today, and the surprising part is not that the message resurfaced, it is who finally saw it, what they noticed inside it, and why one person hoped those forgotten words would never be examined again. Your soulmate did not go searching for a secret. They were not trying to reopen an old chapter or prove anyone wrong. It happened almost casually, through a moment that seemed ordinary at first, the kind of moment most people would forget within an hour. An old conversation appeared. A message from another time. Words written when emotions were different, circumstances were different, and nobody imagined those sentences would matter again. Yet the instant your soulmate read them, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just enough for them to stop. Just enough for their eyes to return to one particular line. And that is where this becomes deeper than anyone expected, because the third party never seemed concerned about the entire message. They were concerned about one small piece of it. One detail that could easily be overlooked unless someone knew what to look for. Don't skip, because what your soulmate noticed was not an accusation, not an insult, and not anything designed to create conflict. It was something much quieter. Something that made an old situation suddenly look different. There are moments when truth does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrives as a tiny inconsistency that refuses to leave your thoughts. A date that does not match. A sentence that carries a different meaning now. A memory that suddenly makes sense when placed beside something you learned later. Your soulmate experienced exactly that kind of moment. They read the message once, then again, and instead of becoming upset, they became thoughtful. Deeply thoughtful. Because hidden between ordinary words was evidence of something they had misunderstood about you for far longer than they realized. The third party had always allowed one version of the story to remain in place. Not necessarily through some dramatic deception, but through omission, suggestion, carefully chosen silence, and the natural human tendency to let people reach conclusions without correcting them. Your soulmate had believed that version because, at the time, it seemed reasonable. They believed you had stepped back because you stopped caring. They believed your silence meant distance. They believed a certain decision you made had been easy for you. But the old message told a different story. It showed that while everyone was interpreting your actions from the outside, you were carrying something privately that changed the meaning of everything. You had not disappeared emotionally. You had been trying not to make an already complicated situation heavier. You had chosen restraint where someone else might have demanded answers. You had protected another person's dignity even when doing so meant allowing yourself to be misunderstood. And when your soulmate recognized this, they did not immediately know what to do with it. How do you respond when a memory you have carried for so long suddenly changes shape? How do you revisit an old conclusion when one forgotten sentence quietly reveals that the person you thought walked away may actually have been trying to prevent more confusion? Something important is waiting for you in this part of the story, because the resurfaced message was only the doorway. The real secret was not written plainly anywhere. Your soulmate could sense that almost immediately. There was something beneath those words, something the third party understood, something you may not even realize was being concealed, and something that could explain why certain events unfolded the way they did. Picture the moment carefully. Your soulmate is reading slowly now. No distractions. No casual scrolling. Their attention has narrowed. They find your name. They see the context surrounding it. Then comes a sentence that seems harmless until they connect it with something the third party once told them. The two versions do not align. And instead of jumping to conclusions, your soulmate begins remembering. A look on someone's face. An unfinished conversation. A moment when the third party changed the subject unexpectedly. A question that was answered too quickly. None of those memories had seemed significant on their own. Together, however, they formed a pattern. Not a frightening pattern. Not one that needed anger. A human pattern, the kind created when someone is afraid that honesty might change relationships they have grown comfortable controlling. The third party may have believed they were protecting themselves, preserving stability, or preventing an uncomfortable truth from coming forward. Perhaps they convinced themselves that letting the misunderstanding remain was easier for everyone. But there is a problem with unfinished truth. Time has a strange way of placing missing pieces back into view. And now one of those pieces has landed directly in front of your soulmate. What happened next was subtle. Your soulmate did not confront anyone. They did not rush to send messages. They simply became quieter. They began comparing what they remembered with what they had just read. And somewhere inside that silence, something softened toward you. Because for the first time they considered a possibility they had avoided for too long. What if you were never the person they had been told you were in that moment? What if your distance was not rejection but consideration? What if the thing they had interpreted as indifference was actually your way of refusing to interfere while circumstances around them were uncertain? Stay till the end, because the realization that followed is where this old message begins touching the present. Your soulmate remembered something you once did that they never fully understood. Maybe you gave them space when part of you wanted to stay. Maybe you refused to expose someone's private behavior because you did not want to win their attention through humiliation. Maybe you allowed them to think less of you rather than turning a complicated situation into a battle. At the time, this looked like weakness or detachment. Looking back through the lens of that message, it appeared completely different. It looked like emotional maturity. And this mattered because the third party knew something about that choice. They knew more than your soulmate had ever been told. There had been a moment, small, private, almost forgettable, when the third party discovered what you truly felt. Perhaps they saw something you wrote. Perhaps another person told them you were planning to speak honestly. Perhaps they accidentally learned that you were prepared to step away, not because you lacked feelings, but because you believed your soulmate deserved the freedom to make their own decision without pressure. That knowledge changed the third party's behavior. Suddenly, keeping the old message hidden was not about preventing embarrassment. It was about preventing context. Because context could change everything. A single sentence can appear cold when separated from what came immediately before it. A decision can appear selfish when nobody explains what forced that decision. Silence can look like abandonment when nobody knows what was sacrificed inside it. Your soulmate is beginning to understand this distinction now. And there is something almost beautiful about the way the realization arrives, because it does not make them furious. It makes them curious about you again. Curious about what else they misunderstood. Curious about how many of your quiet choices carried meanings they never saw. Curious about whether the connection they once felt was affected less by what happened between you and more by what was never communicated clearly. Then another detail appears. This one is smaller than the first, yet somehow more powerful. Near the end of the old message there is a reference to a conversation. Something like, "I already told them," or, they know why I'm doing this, or perhaps a simple mention of somebody who was supposed to explain the situation afterward. Your soulmate knows immediately who that person was. The third party. And suddenly a question enters their mind that cannot be dismissed. If the third party was supposed to tell them something, why do they have no memory of ever hearing it? That question changes the emotional temperature of the entire discovery. Not into anger. Into clarity. Because now your soulmate understands that the missing information may not have been lost accidentally. Someone had been trusted with a piece of your truth, and for reasons still unclear, that piece never arrived. Imagine carrying an opinion about someone for months or years, only to realize your opinion was built around a conversation that never reached you. Imagine discovering that the person you thought chose silence may actually have believed their explanation had already been delivered. This is why your soulmate keeps returning to the message. They are no longer reading it as something old. They are reading it as a bridge between two versions of the past. And suddenly, memories begin reorganizing themselves. Your kindness feels different. Your hesitation feels different. Even moments when you seemed unusually composed now carry another possibility. Maybe you were holding back words because you believed saying them would make someone else's life harder. There is an unexpected dignity in being misunderstood without immediately fighting to correct every assumption. Your soulmate sees that now. Perhaps not completely, but enough. Enough for a wall inside them to become less certain of itself. Enough for an old judgment to loosen. Enough for them to wonder whether the story they accepted had always been missing its most important page. Yet here is the detail nobody expected: the third party apparently knew that this message still existed. That is why its return feels so significant. At some point, the third party had made a strange remark about old conversations, old screenshots, old messages, or things that were better left in the past. At the time, your soulmate thought nothing of it. Now those words are suddenly illuminated by context. Why would someone care whether harmless old messages remained unseen? Why would something so ordinary matter? Unless the message contained a clue to something larger. Your soulmate begins thinking back to the exact period when everything between you changed. The timing is important. There was a window, a narrow stretch of days, perhaps even hours, when one honest conversation could have altered the direction of everything. You were waiting for something. Your soulmate was waiting for something too. And somewhere between you stood information that never crossed the distance. The third party was closer to that information than either of you knew. Something happened during that window. Something was said privately. Something was misunderstood. And rather than being corrected, the misunderstanding hardened into the story everyone eventually accepted. But now the old message has cracked that story open. Stay with this, because what your soulmate noticed next was not in your words at all. It was in the response beneath them. A reply from the third party, brief, almost dismissive, perhaps only a few words. Yet the timing of that reply revealed they had understood exactly what you meant. They knew you were not rejecting your soulmate. They knew you were stepping back for another reason. They knew you expected them to communicate something. And apparently, they never did. That realization is powerful precisely because it remains incomplete. Your soulmate still does not know why. Was the third party trying to protect a friendship? Were they afraid of being excluded? Did they believe they knew what was best? Did they misunderstand your intentions themselves and act from that misunderstanding? Or was there another conversation entirely, one that happened after the message and has never resurfaced? Your soulmate refuses to assume the worst. That matters. Instead, they are choosing patience. They understand that people make complicated choices when emotions are involved. Sometimes people conceal information because they fear change, not because they intend harm. Sometimes someone delays telling the truth until the moment passes, then does not know how to admit what they withheld. And sometimes a person begins with a small omission, only to realize later that correcting it would require explaining everything that followed. This possibility has entered your soulmate's mind. But something even more personal is happening underneath all of it. They are seeing you again, not the version created by old misunderstandings, not the version shaped by somebody else's interpretation, but the person beneath those layers. They remember how carefully you once chose your words. They remember moments when you seemed ready to say more, then stopped. They remember the strange sadness behind a smile they once assumed meant nothing. And suddenly your silence has a voice. It says, "I cared enough not to force this." It says, "I hoped the truth would reach you without me having to hurt someone else to deliver it." It says, "I trusted that eventually you would understand." Whether those exact thoughts were yours or not, your soulmate is finally considering the generosity that may have existed inside your actions. And that realization carries them toward a second discovery. Somewhere connected to the original message is another missing piece. Perhaps a deleted reply. Perhaps a reference to a conversation that happened in person. Perhaps an attachment or an old photograph mentioned but no longer visible. Whatever it is, your soulmate knows the resurfaced message is incomplete. The most revealing line points beyond itself. It refers to something that happened afterward. Something the third party apparently discussed with someone else. Something about you that could explain not only why the truth stayed hidden, but why the third party became unusually invested in keeping you and your soulmate from comparing what each of you had been told. And here, the mystery shifts again. Because the secret may not be about something you did. It may be about what the third party realized about your soulmate's feelings for you. Think about that carefully. What if the thing they were trying to keep buried was not evidence against you, but evidence that your soulmate's connection to you had always been stronger than they admitted? What if the third party saw something early, something in the way your soulmate spoke about you, defended you, remembered tiny details about you, and became aware that if the full truth ever reached them, the emotional distance between you might disappear much faster than anyone expected? There is no need to turn that possibility into a dramatic certainty. Your soulmate is not doing that either. They are simply asking better questions now. And better questions often lead people closer to truth than confident assumptions ever could. Something important is waiting for you, because the greatest change so far is not what your soulmate learned about the third party. It is what they learned about themselves. They realized they had been carrying an old interpretation of you without ever checking whether it was complete. That realization humbled them. It made them reconsider the moments when pride kept them silent. It made them wonder whether you, too, were waiting for clarity that never came. For a few minutes, the entire story stops being about who hid what and becomes something gentler. Two people who may have cared more deeply than either one understood, standing on opposite sides of information that never reached its destination. There is something profoundly human about that. We often imagine relationships change because of enormous moments, but sometimes everything turns on a sentence nobody delivered, a question nobody asked, a hesitation that lasted 5 seconds too long. Your soulmate recognizes that now. And instead of wanting to rewrite the past, they are beginning to think about what could be different in the present. They cannot control what someone withheld years ago. They cannot change the version of events they once accepted. But they can decide not to let an old misunderstanding continue speaking for you. They can become curious instead of certain. They can allow space for a fuller truth. And that shift may be more meaningful than any dramatic confrontation could ever be. Yet the deepest secret remains hidden. The resurfaced message has only revealed that a secret exists. Somewhere between the lines is proof that another conversation took place, one your soulmate has never heard about, one the third party hoped would remain disconnected from this message. Your soulmate has noticed the clue now. It is a name. Not yours. Not theirs. A different name. Someone who was there at the time, someone who apparently heard what the third party said immediately after receiving your message. And when your soulmate recognized that name, they remembered something this person had once told them, something that sounded strange then but suddenly makes perfect sense now. They have not connected every piece yet. Not fully. But one thing is becoming clear, the old message did not return merely to expose yesterday. It returned because the truth surrounding that moment was never complete. And as your soulmate sits with the pieces they have finally seen, one question remains louder than all the others. What exactly did that other person hear the third party say about you after your message arrived, and why has nobody ever told your soulmate until now? The name at the bottom of that forgotten conversation changed everything without saying a single new word, because your soulmate recognized it instantly, and with that recognition came a memory they had never understood until now. Years, months, or perhaps only a season ago, this person had said something unusual about you, something brief enough to dismiss at the time, yet specific enough to return now with startling clarity. They had once hinted that there was more to your silence than anyone realized. They had almost explained it, then stopped themselves. Your soulmate remembered the exact hesitation. The unfinished sentence. The way the conversation shifted immediately afterward. Back then, it seemed meaningless. Now it feels like a door that had been left slightly open all along. And this is where the old message becomes far more important than anyone expected, because your soulmate is beginning to understand that the third party was not the only person who knew what actually happened. Someone else witnessed part of it. Someone else heard the explanation that never reached your soulmate. And if that person remembers the conversation clearly, then the entire version of events your soulmate carried could be about to change. Don't skip. Because the next realization does not arrive through confrontation. It arrives through memory. Your soulmate starts reconstructing that day with unusual precision. Where they were. Who contacted them. What the third party said. What you did afterward. Small details begin aligning like pieces that had been scattered across different rooms. They remember receiving a message that felt unusually final. They remember wondering why your tone had shifted so suddenly. They remember the third party telling them not to read too deeply into it. Maybe they have moved on, was the suggestion. Maybe it is better not to ask. Something along those lines had quietly closed the door to further questions. Your soulmate trusted that advice because there was no obvious reason not to. But the resurfaced message reveals something completely different. You had expected a conversation to happen afterward. You had written as if certain context would be explained. And the third party had responded in a way that showed they understood that responsibility. Yet your soulmate never received that explanation. Imagine the strange calm that follows such a discovery. There is no explosion. No dramatic accusation. Instead, there is a deep inward pause where a person realizes that something they once called rejection may have been miscommunication. Your soulmate sits with that possibility longer than they expected. It changes the emotional meaning of so many memories. That day you avoided looking at them too long. That moment you left early. The message you typed carefully instead of saying everything directly. The quiet distance that followed. It had once looked like you were closing a chapter. Now it may have been you waiting for something to be clarified that never was. Something important is waiting for you in this realization, because your soulmate suddenly remembers another conversation. One involving the person whose name appeared in the old thread. It had happened later, long after everything between you became complicated. This person had casually said, "You two never really knew what the other person was told." Your soulmate had laughed it off then. Perhaps they thought it was simply an observation. But now the sentence returns with weight. What did that person know? Why phrase it that way? And most importantly, why had nobody ever explained what each of you had actually been told? Your soulmate begins to understand that there may have been two completely different stories running side by side. You believed your soulmate knew why you stepped back. Your soulmate believed you stepped back because your feelings had changed. Both of you acted according to information the other did not have. And between those two interpretations stood the third party, holding more context than either of you realized. Stay till the end, because this is where your soulmate discovers something about the third party that makes the situation more human, not more frightening. They remember how uncertain the third party seemed during that period. Maybe this person feared losing their closeness with your soulmate. Maybe they worried that if you and your soulmate finally spoke openly, the entire social dynamic around them would change. Maybe they convinced themselves they were protecting your soulmate from disappointment. People can make poor choices while believing they are preventing pain. And sometimes the longer someone delays correcting a misunderstanding, the more difficult honesty becomes. Your soulmate begins to see that possibility. Perhaps the third party did not begin with some carefully planned intention. Perhaps they simply failed to deliver one important message. Then days passed. Then circumstances changed. Then admitting the omission became uncomfortable. Then silence became easier than explaining why they had stayed silent. One small choice may have grown into a larger secret simply because time kept moving. Yet this does not erase what the discovery means. Your soulmate still needs to understand what was withheld. And the clue is hidden inside a sentence from that other person, a sentence remembered only because of the resurfaced message. They once said something about you that your soulmate considered strange, that you had done more than anyone knew. At the time, your soulmate assumed it referred to kindness or some ordinary favor. Now they are wondering whether it meant something far more specific. Did you protect their reputation during a misunderstanding? Did you quietly correct something that could have embarrassed them? Did you refuse to repeat information that would have made the third party look bad? Did you step aside because you believed forcing the truth into the open would create unnecessary hurt? The more your soulmate revisits the period, the more one pattern becomes undeniable. You rarely behaved like someone seeking attention. You behaved like someone trying to preserve peace. And perhaps that was exactly why your actions were so easy to misinterpret. Loud intentions are easy to notice. quiet intentions require context. Your soulmate had been given the action without the context. They saw you leave. They never heard why. They saw you become quieter. They never knew what you had already tried to communicate. They noticed that you stopped asking questions. They never learned that someone had told you the matter was already settled. These details create a completely different emotional picture. Suddenly, your soulmate is not asking, "Why did you walk away?" They are asking, "Who told you there was nothing left to stay for?" And that question leads straight back toward the third party. But something even more unexpected happens. Your soulmate finds an older message of their own, one they had forgotten sending. It was written shortly after everything changed. In it, they had asked the third party a direct question about you. Not a dramatic question. Something simple. Maybe, "Did they say anything else?" or "Do you think I should reach out?" The answer from the third party had been short, "No, leave it." Those two words had influenced more than anyone realized. Your soulmate had taken them as confirmation that you wanted distance. But now, beside your resurfaced message, those words feel strangely incomplete. Because your message clearly suggested the opposite. You were waiting for understanding. You had not closed the door. You had simply refused to push it open yourself. There is a quiet ache in your soulmate as they realize this, but it is not hopelessness. It is the kind of sadness that comes when people understand how close they once were to having an honest conversation. One question. One message. One person choosing to explain rather than interpret. Any of those things might have changed the course of the story. Yet your soulmate does not stay trapped in regret. Something gentler replaces it. Compassion. For you. For themselves. Even, cautiously, for the third party. Because everyone involved may have been acting from fear of change, uncertainty, pride, or confusion. The real lesson emerging from this old message is not about assigning blame. It is about how fragile connection becomes when people speak through intermediaries instead of directly to each other. Your soulmate understands that now in a way they never did then. If there is ever another opportunity to understand you, they do not want someone else interpreting your words for them. They want to hear what you meant from you. And that shift is far more important than any secret being exposed. But the secret still matters, because the third party appears to have known one thing about your feelings that your soulmate never knew. The clue arrives through a timestamp. Your soulmate notices that your message was sent late in the evening, but the third party's reply came much later. Between those two times, another conversation had apparently taken place. The other person, the one whose name resurfaced, had been with the third party during part of that window. Your soulmate remembers this because there had been a photograph, a casual mention, some ordinary detail proving they were together. Now the timeline makes sense. The third party received your message. They discussed it with someone. Then they replied to you. Yet afterward, your soulmate was told almost nothing. What was discussed during those missing hours? That becomes the new question. And suddenly, a sentence from that other person returns again. I thought they were going to tell you. Your soulmate remembers hearing those words once, perhaps in a completely different context. They had never asked what they meant. Now they wish they had. Something important is waiting for you, because your soulmate is beginning to realize that the hidden secret may not have been about your past at all. It may have been about a choice you made that night. You may have said something to the third party that would have changed how your soulmate understood your feelings completely. Perhaps you admitted that stepping away was the hardest thing you had done. Perhaps you said you would return if your soulmate ever asked you directly. Perhaps you explained that you did not want to compete with anyone or create pressure, but that your feelings had not disappeared. Maybe you trusted the third party to communicate one simple truth, that your silence was not a goodbye. Whatever the exact words were, the third party seems to have understood that the situation was more complicated than your soulmate believed. And this is why the old message mattered so much. It did not prove every detail. It proved that another detail existed. It revealed that your soulmate had been living with an incomplete explanation. The difference between those two things is enormous. Your soulmate does not want to fill the missing spaces with imagination. Instead, they begin looking for what can actually be known. They revisit old conversations without forcing conclusions. They notice which messages came directly from you and which ones were filtered through somebody else. The difference becomes obvious. Your direct words were careful but warm. The interpretations surrounding them were colder. Your messages left room for understanding. The third party's summaries often made things sound finished. That contrast is difficult to ignore. And somewhere in the middle of this quiet investigation, your soulmate realizes something deeply personal. They had sensed all along that the ending between you felt unnatural. Too abrupt. Too unresolved. They had tried to convince themselves that some connections simply end without explanation, and sometimes they do. But yours had always carried the strange feeling of a sentence interrupted halfway through. Perhaps this is why certain memories of you never fully faded. Not because of destiny or some guaranteed outcome, but because the human mind naturally returns to stories that never received a clear ending. Now, for the first time, your soulmate can see why. There was information missing from the ending. The chapter was not necessarily unfinished because you belonged together forever. It was unfinished because neither of you had ever received the same version of what happened. That distinction brings your soulmate peace. They no longer need to romanticize the confusion. They simply want clarity. And clarity begins with understanding that you may have been carrying your own unanswered questions this entire time. There is something quietly powerful about that realization. Your soulmate had once wondered whether you ever thought about what happened. Now they suspect you probably did, not constantly, not obsessively, but enough to wonder why something meaningful became distant so quickly. Maybe you assumed they had chosen not to respond. Maybe you believed the third party had explained everything and your soulmate simply did not feel the same way. If so, then your silence afterward makes perfect sense. You were respecting what you believed was their decision. Meanwhile, your soulmate was respecting what they believed was yours. Two people giving each other space because both thought the other person requested it. The irony is almost impossible to miss. And this is when your soulmate notices another tiny line buried farther up in the old conversation. It is yours. A sentence they had overlooked because it appears unrelated at first. Please make sure they understand I'm not upset. That sentence stops everything. Not because it is dramatic, but because it answers a question your soulmate had carried for so long. They had believed you were angry. Someone had told them you were disappointed, maybe even unwilling to speak. Yet here you were, explicitly saying the opposite. Please make sure they understand I'm not upset. Your soulmate reads the sentence repeatedly. And with each reading, another assumption quietly falls away. You were not punishing them. You were not trying to make them chase you. You were not withdrawing affection to create a reaction. You were trying to prevent them from feeling guilty. That changes the emotional meaning of the entire period. Your soulmate remembers how long they carried guilt anyway. How often they thought they had hurt you beyond repair. How that guilt made reaching out feel even harder. If they had known you were not angry, perhaps they would have spoken sooner. The third party had the sentence. Your soulmate never received it. And suddenly, the hidden secret becomes more specific. Someone did not merely fail to communicate logistics. They failed to communicate your emotional intention. They allowed your soulmate to believe you were hurt in a way you had specifically tried to prevent. Why? That answer still has not surfaced. But another person may know. The person whose name appeared in the thread had apparently heard the third party react to your message. And according to one old memory, their reaction was strange. They had said something like, "This changes everything," then later behaved as though nothing had changed at all. Your soulmate remembers hearing about this indirectly. At the time, it sounded like meaningless conversation. Now it feels like the center of the mystery. What changed everything? What did the third party understand in that moment that they did not want your soulmate to know? The answer may be surprisingly simple. Perhaps they realized your feelings were still real. Perhaps they discovered that the misunderstanding between you and your soulmate could be resolved quickly if either one of you knew the truth. Perhaps that possibility threatened a relationship dynamic the third party valued. Not because they hated you, but because they feared losing influence, closeness, or familiarity. Human beings sometimes resist changes that have nothing to do with malice. A friend may fear being left behind. Someone may worry that a new relationship will alter everything. Someone may convince themselves that keeping people apart is protecting everyone from uncertainty. But when choices are made for other people without their knowledge, complications follow. Your soulmate sees that clearly now. And what they want most is not revenge. It is ownership of their own understanding. They no longer want someone else deciding what they should know about you. They no longer want old assumptions telling them how to interpret the present. They want truth in its simplest form, even if that truth turns out to be less dramatic than anyone imagined. That is where the emotional peak softens. Your soulmate places the phone down. They do not need to solve every question tonight. Some truths deserve patience. Some conversations need the right moment. And some discoveries become clearer when emotion is allowed to settle first. Yet one thing has already changed permanently: they no longer see your silence the same way. They see intention inside it now. They see restraint. They see a person who may have been trying to do the right thing while lacking the information needed to know whether it worked. And somehow, that understanding brings them closer to the version of you they once trusted naturally. But the final clue in this part appears where nobody expected it. Your soulmate scrolls farther back, past the resurfaced message, past the reply, past the conversation that seemed important. There is another message from the third party sent just minutes earlier to someone else. Your name appears in the preview. Only part of the sentence is visible, but it is enough to make your soulmate stop again. The words are not cruel. They are not threatening. They are almost vulnerable. The third party had written, "If they know how this person really feels, everything between us will change." And suddenly, the secret takes on an entirely new shape. This was never only about hiding what you said. It was about what your truth might cause the third party to lose. Yet even that is not the whole story, because directly beneath that sentence is a reply from the other person, one your soulmate has never seen until now, and the first 5 words of that reply reveal there was another promise made that night, a promise involving you, your soulmate, and a truth someone had agreed to keep quiet. Your soulmate reads those first words once, then twice, and realizes the old message was only the beginning. 5 quiet words were enough to make your soulmate realize the mystery had been pointing in the wrong direction all along. You promised you would tell them. For several seconds, they simply stared at the sentence. Not because it revealed everything, but because it confirmed something they had only suspected until now. There had been a promise. Someone was supposed to speak. Someone had agreed that your soulmate deserved to know what you truly meant. Yet somehow, that conversation never happened. Your soulmate read the surrounding messages carefully, searching for context without forcing an answer that was not there. The third party's response was surprisingly brief. I know. Just not yet. Those 4 words carried more weight than anything dramatic could have carried. Not yet. The truth had not been forgotten. It had been delayed. And somewhere between not yet and everything that followed, the delay became silence. Stay with this, because your soulmate's next realization was not about what the third party did. It was about what they themselves had done because of that missing information. They remembered stepping back from you. They remembered convincing themselves that reaching out might disrespect your wishes. They remembered days when they almost sent a message, then stopped because someone had assured them you wanted distance. But your old words now said something completely different. You had asked for understanding. You had asked for reassurance to be passed along. You had specifically said you were not angry. And someone had promised to explain. Suddenly, the past did not feel like a closed door anymore. It felt like 2 people standing on opposite sides of the same door, each believing the other had locked it. That thought stayed with your soulmate longer than anything else. What if neither of you had truly chosen the distance? What if distance simply grew because both of you were responding to assumptions? There was no need to turn that question into certainty. Your soulmate understood that. Memory can be imperfect. Context can disappear. People can remember the same moment differently. But one thing was undeniable. The story they had believed was incomplete. And incomplete stories have a way of creating conclusions that feel certain only because nobody knows what is missing. Don't skip, because the old conversation contained another detail that softened something deep inside your soulmate. A little farther down, the person who had challenged the third party wrote, "They're trying to protect everyone here." Your soulmate knew instantly who they'd meant. You. Protect everyone. Those words made them remember your behavior during that confusing period. You had avoided turning people against each other. You had never publicly blamed anyone. You had never demanded that your soulmate choose sides. Even when you could have defended yourself by revealing private details, you seemed to choose quiet instead. At the time, your soulmate interpreted that quiet as emotional distance. Now they began wondering whether it had actually been restraint. The idea was almost painfully simple. Perhaps you knew something that would have made the third party look bad, but you refused to use it as leverage. Perhaps you believed that if your connection with your soulmate was genuine, it should not need another person's humiliation in order to survive. That possibility changed the atmosphere around every old memory. Your soulmate remembered a conversation where they had almost accused you of not caring. They remembered the expression you gave them. Not angry, not defensive, just strangely tired. You had said something simple, perhaps, "There's more to this than you know." Then you stopped. Why didn't you explain? Your soulmate had wondered for so long. Now an answer was beginning to form. Maybe you believed the explanation was already on its way. Maybe you trusted someone else's promise. Maybe you thought telling the whole truth yourself would break a confidence you had chosen to protect. And that was when your soulmate noticed something extraordinary in its ordinariness. Throughout the resurfaced messages, you never once spoke disrespectfully about the third party. Even privately. Even when you were clearly confused. Even when the situation was costing you something emotionally. Your words focused on what your soulmate needed to understand, not on making someone else look wrong. That mattered. Your soulmate had been told, years or months earlier, that you were resentful toward the third party. Yet nothing in the actual message supported that interpretation. The difference between what you wrote and what they were told became impossible to ignore. Something important is waiting for you here, because your soulmate finally asked themselves the question they should have asked long ago: how much of what I believe about this person came directly from them? The answer surprised them. Far less than they had assumed. Many of their strongest conclusions about you had arrived secondhand. They don't want to talk. They're upset. They've moved on. They think it is better this way. Each sentence sounded reasonable at the time. Each one had shaped a decision. Yet your actual messages carried a different emotional tone. You seemed uncertain, yes. Careful, certainly. But closed? Not completely. Angry? Apparently not. Finished? That was becoming harder to believe. Your soulmate felt something change inside them, not a rush toward romance, not some unrealistic certainty about what should happen next, but a renewed respect for direct truth. They realized how easily people can lose each other when too many voices stand between them. And quietly, they made a promise to themselves: if another meaningful conversation with you ever happens, they will listen to your words instead of somebody else's interpretation of them. That decision alone felt like freedom. Then the mystery deepened. The person who had written, "You promised you would tell them," sent another message a few minutes later: "If you wait too long, they'll both think the other chose this." Your soulmate stopped again. Both. Not just you. Not just them. Both. The sender had understood exactly what was happening. They had predicted the misunderstanding while it was still unfolding. They knew you might believe your soulmate chose distance. They knew your soulmate might believe you chose it. And apparently, they tried to warn the third party. The realization was almost surreal. Somewhere in the past, while you and your soulmate were quietly interpreting each other's silence, another person had already seen the entire pattern. So why had they not spoken directly? That question had an answer too, hidden a few messages later. It isn't mine to tell. Your soulmate understood. This person had believed the responsibility belonged to the third party, the person who had received your confidence and promised to communicate it. Maybe they were trying to respect boundaries. Maybe they thought the truth would be shared eventually. Perhaps everyone involved believed somebody else would handle the difficult conversation. And while everyone waited for the right person and the right moment, the moment disappeared. There is something painfully human about that. Not every broken connection begins with cruelty. Sometimes it begins with hesitation. A person says, "I will explain tomorrow." Tomorrow becomes next week. Next week feels awkward. Then circumstances change. Eventually, explaining what happened feels harder than living with the misunderstanding. That may have been what happened here. Your soulmate was beginning to see that the third party's hidden secret might not be some shocking act at all. It might be a choice they regretted. A promise they failed to keep, followed by years of not knowing how to admit that one omission had changed more than expected. Yet another detail refused to fit neatly into that explanation. If the third party simply regretted delaying the truth, why had they seemed so uneasy whenever old messages were mentioned? Why had they once suggested clearing old conversations? Why had they reacted strangely when your name resurfaced? There had to be another layer. Your soulmate kept reading. Then they found it. A sentence from the third party written later that same night: "If I tell them everything, they'll know I was the one who said it first." Your soulmate felt their attention sharpen. Said what first? This was the first clue that the missing secret involved not only your feelings, but something the third party themselves had told your soulmate. They began tracing old memories again, this time searching for a specific statement that had influenced everything. And one memory rose above the rest. During the exact period when you became distant, the third party had told your soulmate something about you, something framed as information they had heard elsewhere. Maybe it was that you were no longer interested. Maybe that you had chosen another direction. Maybe that you had privately admitted the connection was not important to you. Whatever it was, your soulmate had believed it because the third party presented it confidently. But the newly discovered sentence suggested something unsettling in a very grounded way. Perhaps that information had not come from anyone else. Perhaps the third party had been the original source. And afterward, when your message contradicted what they had already said, telling the truth would have required them to admit that their earlier claim had been wrong. Suddenly, "not yet" made sense. They needed time. They needed to decide how to explain themselves. Then time moved too quickly. Your soulmate did not feel anger first. They felt disappointment, but even that softened into understanding. People sometimes say things too confidently. They assume they know what someone feels. They predict an outcome. They speak before checking. Then evidence appears that proves them wrong, and pride makes correction harder than it should be. Perhaps the third party had simply misread you at first. Perhaps they told your soulmate, "Trust me, they are done," believing it. Then your message arrived revealing that you were not done at all, you were trying to protect the situation while still caring deeply. Admitting the mistake would have forced the third party to say, "I gave you the wrong impression." Maybe that felt embarrassing. Maybe they postponed it. Maybe every passing day made the admission feel larger. Your soulmate could understand how that happens without pretending it was harmless. Because the consequences had been real. Two people acted on information that may never have been accurate. Stay till the end, because there was another message beneath it, and this one made your soulmate see the third party differently. "I didn't think they cared this much." That sentence was not defensive. It sounded almost surprised. The third party had underestimated your feelings. They had made an assumption about you and discovered, through your old message, that they were wrong. This changed the entire emotional shape of the secret. Maybe the third party never intentionally set out to keep you apart. Maybe they genuinely believed your connection was temporary or one-sided. They gave advice based on that belief. Then your message revealed a depth they had not expected. Instead of immediately correcting themselves, they hesitated. That hesitation became the mistake. And the mistake became harder to confess as time went on. Your soulmate suddenly felt an unexpected sense of relief. The story did not need a villain. It did not require somebody to have been secretly working against you from the beginning. It could simply be a story about people misreading each other, speaking too soon, protecting pride, and realizing too late how much one conversation mattered. Yet that did not explain everything. There remained the question of why the third party had recently seemed determined to keep the old message from resurfacing. If their original mistake had been innocent, what were they still afraid of now? The answer appeared in a later exchange, and it was more personal than your soulmate anticipated. Years, or perhaps months, after the original misunderstanding, the third party had apparently admitted something privately to the same witness. The message said, "I should have fixed it then, but now if they learn the truth, they'll wonder how many choices they made because of me." Your soulmate sat completely still. There it was. The hidden secret was not simply that one message had been withheld. The third party had eventually understood the impact of what happened. They knew their assumption had influenced your soulmate. They knew your soulmate's decisions were partly shaped by information they had provided. And they carried guilt about it. Not guilt for deliberately destroying anything, but guilt for watching an early misunderstanding become a long-standing reality without correcting it. That explained the discomfort. It explained why old messages felt threatening. The third party was afraid your soulmate would revisit the past and feel manipulated, even if manipulation had never been the original intention. Your soulmate breathed differently after reading that. Their first instinct was not to punish anyone. It was to reclaim something they had unknowingly surrendered, their own interpretation of you. They could not undo the past, but they could stop letting someone else's old assumption define who you were in their memory. That felt powerful. They began separating fact from interpretation. Fact, you sent a message. Fact, you asked for reassurance to be passed along. Fact, the third party acknowledged that responsibility. Fact. Your soulmate did not receive the full explanation. Interpretation, why it happened. That part still required patience. Your soulmate refused to turn missing information into certainty. And that mature restraint opened another door. What mattered most now was not whether the third party had been right or wrong years ago. It was whether your soulmate could finally see you without that filter. And as they did, a memory returned, one of the last moments you shared before the distance became real. You had looked at them as though there were words sitting behind your eyes. You almost said something. Then you smiled softly and told them to take care of themselves. Your soulmate had carried that moment as proof you were saying goodbye. Now they wondered if it had actually been something else. Perhaps you believed the conversation had already been explained. Perhaps you were waiting to see whether your soulmate would respond once they understood. Perhaps when no response came, you accepted their silence as an answer. Your soulmate imagined, for the first time, what that might have felt like from your side. You had trusted someone to communicate your intention. Then nothing came back. Maybe you thought your soulmate had understood and simply chosen not to pursue anything further. If so, then your later distance was not mysterious at all. You were respecting a decision that had never actually been made. The thought landed gently, but deeply. Two people may have spent all this time respecting choices neither one made. Something important is waiting for you, because the next clue does not come from the past. It comes from the present. Your soulmate notices that the third party has recently behaved differently whenever you are mentioned. Not defensive. Not hostile. Almost resigned. As if they have known for some time that eventually the old story would need to be corrected. A few weeks or months ago, they may even have said something strange like, "There are things about that situation you never knew," then refused to elaborate. Your soulmate remembers brushing it aside. Now those words sound less like mystery and more like preparation. Perhaps the third party had been trying to find the courage to tell the truth themselves. Perhaps seeing the message resurface simply arrived sooner than they expected. That possibility prevents your soulmate from rushing toward judgment. They begin to wonder whether the third party has carried this secret as a burden rather than a weapon. Maybe they have replayed their decision too. Maybe they have imagined how differently things could have gone if they had delivered your message exactly as you asked. Maybe the person most afraid of the old message was not afraid of being exposed as cruel, but afraid of being seen as someone whose hesitation accidentally changed two lives. That is a much more human fear. And your soulmate can understand it. But understanding does not mean ignoring the truth. They still need clarity. The difference is that now they can seek it without turning the conversation into a battle. They can ask, "What happened?" instead of, "Why did you do this to me?" They can listen. They can allow nuance. They can discover what each person actually remembers. Your soulmate realizes that truth does not have to destroy relationships. Sometimes truth repairs them by replacing years of assumptions with something more honest. And perhaps that is what this resurfaced message is really offering, not a chance to reopen old wounds, but a chance to finally understand an unfinished chapter without bitterness. Then they reached the final exchange from that night. The third party had written, "I'll tell them tomorrow." The witness replied, "Promise?" And the third party answered, "Promise." Tomorrow came. Your soulmate remembered it clearly now. The third party did contact them. They talked for nearly an hour. Your name came up. Yet somehow, the truth still did not. What happened during that conversation? Your soulmate searched their memory, and one sentence returned with incredible clarity. The third party had asked them a question. If you knew they still cared, would it change anything? At the time, your soulmate thought it was hypothetical. They had answered cautiously, perhaps saying, "I don't know," because they were afraid of admitting too much. The third party changed the subject. Now your soulmate understood why that question had been asked. It was not hypothetical at all. The third party already knew. They were testing the answer before deciding whether to reveal your message. And your soulmate's hesitation may have convinced them not to. Suddenly, another layer of the misunderstanding emerged. The third party had not necessarily hidden your truth because they wanted to keep you apart. They may have heard your soulmate's uncertain response and concluded that telling them would only complicate things. Your soulmate, meanwhile, had answered uncertainly because they believed you no longer cared. Every person was reacting to incomplete information. Every answer was shaping the next mistake. It was almost astonishing how little dishonesty was required for so much confusion to grow. Just assumptions. Just fear. Just badly timed silence. And your soulmate saw the lesson clearly now. Sometimes the deepest secret is not an outrageous revelation. Sometimes it is discovering how close people came to the truth while missing it by a single honest sentence. But one mystery remained. After asking that question, the third party had apparently sent the witness another message later that night. Your soulmate found only a preview of it. Most of the conversation was missing, but a few words remained visible. I couldn't tell them after what they admitted. What had your soulmate admitted during that hour-long conversation? Something they themselves no longer remembered as significant? Something that made the third party change their mind about revealing your message? Your soulmate searched their memory harder. Then one moment returned. They had confessed something about you that night. Not that they disliked you. Not that they were finished. Almost the opposite. They had admitted that they were afraid of how much you mattered. Afraid that if they knew you still cared, they would not be able to pretend the connection meant nothing. And when your soulmate finally remembered saying those words, their entire understanding of the hidden secret shifted again, because the third party had known the truth about both of you at the same time, and for reasons your soulmate still does not understand, they chose to keep each person's confession separate.